Hey, welcome back to the Nero world. Today we're diving into another Nero Wolfe mystery, smart, sharp, and worth every minute. The trouble with rich people is that they always think their money entitles them to a certain quality of trouble. Not the ordinary kind, unpaid bills, cheating spouses, the slow humiliation of a parking dispute. No, rich people want their crises to have weight and consequence, the sort that requires a genius to untangle. Which is, I suppose, why they end up at the brownstone on West 35th Street, sitting across from 318 pounds of genius in a yellow chair, watching him pretend not to care about their problem, while caring enormously about it. The woman who arrived on a Tuesday in late October was named Cornelia Voss, and she had the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. Not beautiful in any obvious way, she was somewhere north of 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled back with the sort of severity that suggested she'd once been a different kind of woman and had decided against it. She wore a charcoal wool coat that cost more than most people's rent, and carried a cream envelope in her left hand, the way you carry something you're not quite ready to hand over. Fritz had shown her into the office at 11:10, which was already a disruption, since Wolfe had just come down from the plant rooms at 11 and considered the first quarter hour of any morning to be a sacred transition period, devoted entirely to beer and the adjustment of his mood. The orchids take 4 hours of his day, 9 to 11, 4 to 6, and he descends from them in a state of benevolent self-satisfaction that can sour quickly if interrupted. He had settled into the custom-built chair behind his desk, the only piece of furniture in the world that could actually support him in comfort, and was reaching for the cold bottle of Remmers that Fritz had left sweating on the little tray, when Cornelia Voss walked in and sat down in the red leather chair across from him without being invited to do so. That impressed me. Most people wait. "Wolfe," she said, without preamble, "my nephew has been murdered, and the police are going to arrest the wrong man." Wolfe set down the beer without drinking it, which was either a tribute to the gravity of the statement, or a sign that the morning had already been thoroughly ruined, and he might as well get on with it. He regarded her with his small dark eyes that always seemed to be conducting a quiet audit. "Good morning," he said. "You are Cornelia Voss." She didn't blink. "You know me?" "I know of you. Your late husband, Edmund Voss, built Voss Capital Partners into a concern worth, at his death, approximately $400 million. You have administered the firm since his death 6 years ago with considerable acumen. Your nephew," he paused, just long enough, "would be Elliot Marsh, your sister's son, who was found dead yesterday morning in his apartment on the Upper West Side. The papers this morning suggest a blow to the head. The police have not yet announced an arrest, though they are, according to those same papers, questioning a business associate." He tilted his head slightly. "I am not wrong?" "You're not wrong." She placed the cream envelope on the edge of his desk. "That contains a check for $20,000. Consider it a retainer. I want you to find who killed Elliot before the police destroy an innocent man." I was at my desk in the corner, making the kind of notes I make when I want to look busy while I'm actually watching everything. I watched Wolfe look at the envelope the way a man looks at a dish he's been served, before he's decided whether he's hungry. "The innocent man," Wolfe said. "Who is he?" "Daniel Ferris. He and Elliot were partners in a real estate development company, Marsh Ferris Properties. They had been arguing, about money, about direction. Daniel has a temper. He made the mistake of saying something regrettable at a dinner party 3 weeks ago. Something about Elliot that was taken out of context, and will be taken further out of context when the district attorney gets his hands on it." She folded her hands in her lap. The envelope stayed where she'd put it. "Daniel did not kill my nephew. I am certain of it." "On what basis are you certain?" "Because I know who did." The room got very quiet. Even the street noise from outside seemed to politely recede. Wolfe's right index finger made one slow arc along the edge of his desk. "Then why," he said, with the patience of a man who expects the answer to be unsatisfying, "are you here rather than at the police precinct?" Cornelia Voss's expression shifted in a way that was hard to categorize. It wasn't guilt, and it wasn't grief, though there was something of both in it. What it mostly was, I decided, was the look of a woman who has spent 50 years making careful decisions, and is now confronting the cost of one of the careless ones. "Because the person I believe is responsible is a member of my family," she said, "and because I have no proof, only a conviction, and because if I'm wrong, I will have destroyed someone I love for nothing." She paused. "And because if I'm right, I need the truth to come out in a way that is controlled." "Controlled," Wolfe repeated in the tone he uses when a word interests him. "I have a foundation, the Voss Foundation. It distributes $7 million annually to educational and medical causes. Any scandal attached to the family name will affect the donors, the recipients, the board. I am not asking you to suppress anything, Mr. Wolfe. I am asking you to find the truth precisely, so that when it emerges whole, rather than in pieces that can be misread." Wolfe looked at the envelope again. Then he looked at me. "Archie," he said, "note the details." I already had my pad open. That's what "note the details" means. It means we're taking the case. I spent the next hour getting the specifics from Cornelia Voss, while Wolfe sat back and drank his beer, and appeared to be thinking about orchid rust or the geopolitical implications of last night's dinner. He was, of course, listening to every syllable. He simply finds it more efficient to let me do the mechanical work of extraction, so that he can focus on pattern. The picture that emerged was this. Elliot Marsh, age 41, had been found dead at 7 in the morning by his housekeeper, a woman named Rosa Padilla, who had a key and came 3 mornings a week. He was in the living room of his apartment at the Cavendish, a pre-war building on West 84th, slumped against the base of the fireplace, with a wound to the back of his skull, consistent, according to the medical examiner's preliminary finding, with contact with the marble mantelpiece. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to be stolen. The medical examiner placed time of death between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Elliot's personal situation was complicated. He had, according to his aunt, been in the process of restructuring Marsh Terrace properties, following a series of deals that had gone sideways in the past 18 months. The firm had taken on a significant investment from an outside party, a man named Roland Cray, a private equity operator whose name I recognized from the financial pages as someone who moved money with efficiency and very little warmth. Cray had put $3 million into Marsh Terrace 18 months ago. He was not happy with the return on that investment. There had been meetings, there had been demands. There had been, in the 2 weeks before Elliot's death, at least 3 phone calls that Elliot had not returned. Daniel Ferris, the partner, was 44, formerly an architect, and had transitioned into development 12 years ago, when he and Elliot first went into business together. The dinner party remark that Cornelia had alluded to, I pressed her on it, had been something to the effect that Elliot was running the company into the ground and dragging everyone in it down with him, followed by something less printable, that involved a metaphor about millstones. It was the kind of thing people say when they're on their 3rd drink and feel aggrieved, and it meant nothing in itself, but it would look wonderful in a prosecution brief. Then there was the family. Elliot's mother, Cornelia's sister, had died 4 years ago. His father, Gerald Marsh, was alive but estranged, living in Connecticut and apparently uninterested in his son's life or death. But Elliot had 2 cousins through the Voss side. Marcus Voss, 36, Edmund's son from his first marriage, who worked nominally at the foundation but spent most of his energy being aggrieved about the will. And Petra Voss, 33, Edmund's daughter from his second marriage to Cornelia herself, who was finishing a graduate degree in art history at Columbia and had, by Cornelia's careful account, been closer to Elliot than perhaps was wise. I wrote down "closer than was wise" and underlined it twice. When I asked Cornelia directly who she thought had killed her nephew, she was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to become significant. "I believe it was Marcus," she said, "but I am not certain, and I am terrified of being wrong." "Why, Marcus?" "Because Elliot had recently discovered something about the Foundation's accounts, something that pointed toward an irregularity. He told me about it the week before he died. He said he hadn't confirmed it yet, but that if what he suspected was true, someone in the family had been stealing from the Foundation for at least 2 years. She paused. "Marcus handles the disbursement records." Wolfe, from behind his desk, said without looking up from his beer, "Was this suspicion communicated to Marcus himself?" Cornelia looked at him. "I don't know. I told no one, but Elliot may have confronted him privately. Elliot was not a man who sat on things." "No," Wolfe murmured. "He was not apparently a man who sat on anything for long." He straightened slightly in the chair. "Very well, Mrs. Voss. I will require a list of everyone who had access to your nephew's apartment, everyone who knew him well enough to visit without announcement, and the name and contact information for Daniel Ferris. I will also want to speak with your stepdaughter Petra and your stepson Marcus, separately, and at my convenience." He gestured very slightly toward the cream envelope. "Leave that where it is. Archie will give you a receipt." Cornelia Voss stood, buttoned the top button of her charcoal coat, and looked at Wolfe with the expression of a woman who is accustomed to hiring the best, and has decided, cautiously, that she has done so again. "Find the truth, Mr. Wolfe," she said. "All of it." "I find nothing else," Wolfe said. After she left, I sat back in my chair and looked at him. He was already reaching for the Remmers again with an air of profound recovery. "Marcus Voss," I said, "embezzling from the Foundation, confronted by Elliot, kills him to keep it quiet. Straightforward enough for a Tuesday." "Phooey." Wolfe poured the beer with the concentration of a liturgical act. "A woman who claims to know the killer, but declines to go to the police. A dead man who discovered a financial irregularity, but apparently did not report it. A business partner conveniently positioned for arrest. And a stepdaughter described as closer to the deceased than was wise." He looked at the foam settling in his glass. "We have been told a story, Archie. I suspect it is not the whole one." "When is it ever?" I said. "Precisely," said Wolfe, and drank. "I spent Wednesday making calls, and Thursday making visits, which is the usual division of labor. Wolfe tells me what he wants to know. I go find it out in the physical world, which he regards with the same wariness a man with a bad hip regards a flight of stairs. Technically navigable, but why bother when someone else can make the trip? The first person I went to see was Daniel Ferris, partly because he was the most immediately threatened, and partly because people who are scared talk faster and more honestly than people who are comfortable. He was expecting me. Cornelia had apparently called ahead, and he met me in the conference room of the Marsh Ferris office on Madison Avenue, which was a clean, bright space that smelled of fresh paint and recent ambition. The ambition had hit some turbulence, judging by the stacks of files on the side table and the dark circles under Ferris's eyes. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with sandy hair going gray at the temples, and the look of someone who had once been energetic and was currently running on reserves. He shook my hand with more force than necessary, which is something people do when they want to seem in control and aren't. "Archie Goodwin," he said, sitting across from me. "I've heard of Nero Wolfe. I didn't know if Cornelia would actually go to him." "She did," I said, "and he's interested, which is good for you." "Is it?" "Not a question. The police came to my apartment Monday night. 2 detectives. They were very polite in the way that means they've already made up their minds. I was home Monday night, alone. My wife is in Boston visiting her sister. I had dinner by myself, watched television until 11, went to bed. No alibi." He spread his hands. "Elliot and I had been arguing. Everyone in the industry knows it. That dinner party thing," he exhaled. "I was angry. I said something stupid. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did you mean it? He was quiet for a moment. We were in trouble, he said. The firm. The Harwick deal fell through last spring. That was a riverfront project in the Bronx. Very complicated. Financing fell apart. And Roland Cray was breathing down our necks about his investment. Elliot's response to pressure was always to take on more risk, find a bigger deal, leverage his way out. My response was to consolidate, cut losses, stabilize. We'd been having that argument for 2 years. He paused. I loved Elliot. He was my partner for 12 years. He was also, in recent months, making decisions that frightened me. When I said what I said at that dinner, I meant the company was being dragged down. Not that Elliot should. I never. He stopped. He pressed his fingers against his mouth for a moment. Tell me about Roland Cray, I said. Something changed in his face. Cray is not a person you want to owe money to. Not because he's dangerous in any physical sense. He's just relentless. He was calling Elliot constantly. Last month he showed up at the office unannounced and spent 45 minutes in Elliot's office. I don't know what was said. When Cray left, Elliot looked like he'd been turned inside out. Did Elliot tell you what was discussed? He said Cray had made a proposal. He wouldn't give me the details. He said he needed to think about it. That was 3 weeks ago. He met my eyes. That was the week Elliot found whatever it was he found about the foundation accounts. How do you know about that? Because Elliot told me. Not everything. He said he wasn't sure yet. But he was agitated about it. He said if what he suspected was true, someone had been bleeding the Voss Foundation for 2 years. He paused. He mentioned Marcus. Did he say he was going to confront Marcus? He said he was going to handle it. Ferris looked down at his hands. That's what Elliot always said. He was going to handle it. Right up until the moment he couldn't. Marcus Voss received me in his apartment in Murray Hill on Thursday afternoon. The apartment was expensive and aggressively tasteful, the kind of place where every object has been selected to signal something about its owner's sophistication. And the overall effect is of a museum no one particularly enjoys visiting. Marcus was 36 and looked like someone who had been told all his life that he was handsome and had come to resent the obligation. He was lean, dark-haired, and possessed of a quality of restlessness that made him seem to be several degrees removed from whatever was happening in front of him. He poured me a scotch I hadn't asked for, and kept his own glass close. My mother called me, he said. She told me she'd engaged Nero Wolfe. She didn't tell me why. To investigate Elliot Marsh's death, I said. I assumed, though the police seem to have settled on Daniel Ferris fairly efficiently. Mr. Wolfe prefers to do his own settling. Marcus looked at me with a thin smile. And where do I fit into Mr. Wolfe's settling? You were Elliot's cousin. You work at the foundation Elliot was apparently looking into. You'd be hard to leave out. The smile stayed, but something behind it shifted. Elliot looking into the foundation. That's interesting. He picked up his glass. Elliot had nothing to do with the foundation. He wasn't on the board. He had no role. He had no standing to look into anything. People look into things without standing all the time, I said. Especially when they suspect something's wrong. Such as? That's what I was going to ask you. He was good. The pause before his response was perfectly calibrated. Long enough to suggest thoughtfulness rather than evasion. Short enough not to look like he was searching for safe ground. The foundation's accounts are clean, he said. They're audited annually by an independent firm. If Elliot thought he'd found something, he was mistaken. He swirled his scotch. Elliot had a talent for finding problems where none existed. It was one of his less appealing qualities. When did you last see him? 2 weeks ago. We had dinner. The family gets together once a month, or tries to. Elliot was there, Petra was there, my mother. It was perfectly civil. Nothing unusual? Elliot was distracted, preoccupied. I assumed it was the business trouble with Ferris and the Cray situation. He looked at me steadily. I did not have a reason to kill my cousin, Mr. Goodwin. I'm aware of how this looks from the outside. Family, money, possible irregularities in accounts I manage. It's a very tidy narrative. But it's fiction. Most fiction is based on something, I said pleasantly. He didn't answer that. He just looked at me with the particular stillness of a man who has decided that the best move is to say nothing further. And we sat with that for a moment before I thanked him for the scotch I hadn't touched and let myself out. Petra Voss was different. She met me at a coffee shop near Columbia on Thursday evening, still in the clothes she'd clearly been wearing all day, paint-stained jeans, an oversized sweater, hair in a disorganized braid. She was dark like her brother, but prettier, with the kind of face that's expressive against its owner's will. When she shook my hand, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she didn't bother hiding it. "I've been crying since Monday," she said, without embarrassment. "I don't see much point in pretending otherwise." "How close were you and Elliot?" I asked, after we'd gotten coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Very. He was more like a brother than a cousin. More than Marcus ever was, anyway." She said Marcus's name with the dismissive familiarity of a sibling, long beyond pretending. "Elliot and I had dinner at least once a week. He'd come up to the neighborhood, or we'd meet somewhere. We talked about everything." "Did he talk about the foundation?" She looked up. "He mentioned it, a couple of weeks ago. He said he'd been going through some records." She paused. "He had access to the annual reports. They're public. The foundation publishes them. He'd been comparing the disbursement records in the reports against some internal documents he'd gotten hold of. He wouldn't tell me how, and he said the numbers weren't matching." "What kind of discrepancy?" "He said over 2 years, maybe $400,000 had been redirected. Not obviously. It was done through a series of small adjustments to grant disbursements, each one small enough not to trigger immediate attention. But across multiple grants, across 2 fiscal years, it added up." She looked down at her coffee. "He was going to take it to the board. He told me that 2 weeks ago. He said he was going to give Marcus a chance to explain first, because he said if there was a legitimate explanation, destroying Marcus publicly would be unforgivable." "Did he confront Marcus?" "He said he was going to. The week before She stopped. "The week before he died, he told me he'd sent Marcus a message asking to meet privately. Marcus replied that he was busy, and they'd talk at the next family dinner." She looked at me. "That was going to be next week. Elliot wasn't happy about waiting." "What do you think happened?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think Marcus killed him. I think Elliot pushed, because Elliot always pushed, and Marcus panicked." Her voice was very steady, which is always more disturbing than shaking. "But I don't know. I also know that Roland Cray was making Elliot's life miserable, and I know that." She stopped. "And you know what?" She looked at me across the coffee table. "I know that Elliot had something on Cray, something separate from the business. He didn't tell me what, but he said it once, sort of offhanded, 2 months ago. He said, 'If Cray ever really comes at me, I have insurance.' I didn't ask what he meant. I should have. I wrote insurance on my pad and underlined it. 'One more thing,' I said. 'The night Elliot died, where were you?' She looked at me without flinching. 'Home, alone, working on a paper.' I know." She almost smiled. "No alibi either. You can check my laptop. There are 3 hours of edits on a document time-stamped between 9 p.m. and midnight, if that helps." It helped some. It didn't settle anything, but Petra Voss, unlike her brother, didn't feel like someone performing the right responses. She felt like someone who was genuinely lost and trying to find her way out through truth. That, of course, doesn't make anyone innocent, but it's a start. Roland Cray was the last person I'd arranged to see, and he was the one I least looked forward to. He had agreed to meet me, through his assistant, through 2 days of scheduling, at his office in a glass tower on Park Avenue, which seemed exactly right. He was the kind of man glass towers were designed to contain. He was 52, compact and precise, with silver hair cut close, and the sort of stillness that isn't calm so much as efficiency. He had eliminated unnecessary movement the way you eliminate unnecessary expense. He sat behind a desk, clear of everything except a single pad of paper and a pen, and he looked at me the way he probably looked at balance sheets. "Cornelia Voss has engaged Nero Wolfe," he said. Not a question. He'd done his homework. "She has," I said. "Interesting choice. I understand Wolfe doesn't leave his house." "He doesn't need to." Cray allowed a thin acknowledgement of this. "What do you want from me, Mr. Goodwin?" "I want to know about your relationship with Elliot Marsh." "I was an investor in Marsh Ferris. That relationship was purely financial. It has now been rendered academic by his death." "Were you expecting to recover your investment?" "I was expecting to have a conversation with Elliot last week. That conversation did not occur, because he was dead." He said this with no particular emphasis, the way you'd note that a flight had been cancelled. "I will pursue the matter with the surviving partner through appropriate legal channels." "Did you visit Elliot's apartment in the 2 weeks before his death?" A pause. "I visited his apartment once, approximately 10 days before his death. We had a conversation about the terms of a restructuring proposal I had made." "What kind of proposal?" "A private financial matter." "Mr. Cray, a man is dead. Private financial matters have a way of becoming relevant. I proposed to convert a portion of my debt position into an equity stake in a new entity that Elliot was considering, a hotel development project on the west side. In exchange for the conversion, I would bring additional capital." He paused. Elliot was hesitant. He said he had other considerations. We left the conversation without resolution. "What other considerations?" He didn't specify. The pause this time was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. He seemed distracted, concerned about something unrelated to the business. "Did he mention the Voss Foundation?" Nothing moved in Roland Cray's face. This was itself informative, because when someone shows no reaction to something surprising, it means they knew it was coming. "No," he said. "Did he mention having insurance?" Now, something moved. Just for an instant, a slight tightening around the eyes, there and gone. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "I suspect you do," I said. "And I suspect Nero Wolfe will want to discuss it with you directly. He'll be in touch." I stood up. Cray didn't move. "Mr. Goodwin," he said as I reached the door, "whatever Elliot may have told people, I am a businessman. I operate within legal parameters. I would encourage your employer not to make assumptions." "Mr. Wolfe doesn't make assumptions," I said. "He makes conclusions. There's a difference." I took the elevator down 32 floors with the distinct feeling that Roland Cray was already on the phone to someone, and that the conversation would not be about hotel development. The medical examiner's report was released Friday morning, and it confirmed what the early rumors had suggested: blunt force trauma to the posterior skull, consistent with the marble mantelpiece of the Cavendish Apartments fireplace. No defensive wounds on the hands or arms, which meant Elliot hadn't seen it coming or hadn't had time to react. Time of death narrowed to between 11:15 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. No foreign DNA under the fingernails. No signs of struggle beyond the immediate impact site. The apartment door had been locked from inside, deadbolt engaged. But the building had a secondary entrance through the service corridor on the 4th floor that connected to the stairwell. The lock on that entrance was a standard magnetic keycard system, and the building manager confirmed to the detective assigned to the case, a Lieutenant Percy Rowcliffe, whose name Wolfe and I know well, and who I regard with the same fondness one regards a persistent headache, that the keycard log showed no activity on the service entrance that night. Which meant either the killer came and went through the front door, or someone had figured out how to defeat a keycard log, which requires expertise that narrows the field. Rowcliffe, characteristically, was focused on Daniel Ferris with the intensity of a man who has found the answer he wanted and intends to keep it. He'd been to the Marsh Ferris office twice, had subpoenaed the firm's financial records, and had reportedly told a colleague that the case would be closed within the week. I know Rowcliffe's track record. It's adequate. It's also, in the handful of cases where it has intersected with Wolfe's work, consistently wrong in the ways that matter most. I got to Rosa Padilla, the housekeeper who found Elliot, through the building manager, who was more cooperative once I mentioned that Nero Wolfe was involved, and that obstructing his investigation was not in anyone's interest. He gave me her phone number. I called. She was willing to talk, though she spoke with the careful economy of someone who had already told her story to the police and wasn't sure what more there was to add. I met her at a diner on Amsterdam Avenue Friday afternoon, and she turned out to be a compact, direct woman in her late 50s who had worked for Elliot for 4 years and regarded his death with the composed grief of someone who has learned to manage their sorrow in practical containers. "The police already asked me everything," she said. "She had coffee. She didn't touch it." "Mr. Wolfe likes to ask everything twice," I said. "It's one of his more charming qualities." She accepted this and told me about finding Elliot. The unlocked inner door. She had a key for the deadbolt, but it hadn't been necessary, which she thought was odd. The living room lights still on, Elliot on the floor near the fireplace. She had called 911 immediately and had not touched anything. She was thorough and precise, and I believed all of it. Then I asked her, "Was there anything unusual in the apartment when you arrived? Anything moved, missing, out of place?" She considered. "One thing. Mr. Marsh had a leather portfolio, dark brown. He kept it on the side table in the living room. He used it for papers, documents he was working on. It wasn't there." "You're sure it's normally there?" "Every morning I cleaned the living room. It was there. He was very particular about it. He said it saved him from losing things." She paused. "It was gone." "Did you tell the police?" "I mentioned it. The detective, Rowcliffe, he wrote it down. I don't know what he did with it." What he'd done with it, knowing Rowcliffe, was deprioritize it in favor of something that pointed at Ferris. I wrote it down with more attention than Rowcliffe had evidently given it. "Did you ever see what was in the portfolio?" "Papers. Documents. Once, maybe 2 weeks ago, I was straightening and it was open on the table. I didn't mean to look. There were some printed pages, numbers, and there was a letter. The letter had the Voss Foundation letterhead." She paused. "I recognized it, because Mr. Marsh received a lot of mail from the foundation. His aunt is involved there." I set my pen down carefully. "The letter had foundation letterhead. Do you know what it said?" I didn't read it, but I noticed, the top of the page there was a name underlined. I only saw it for a second before I moved away. She paused, with the precision of someone retrieving a specific memory. The name was Cray, Roland Cray. I was back at the brownstone by 6, which is within the acceptable window for returning before Wolfe comes down from the plant rooms at 6 and expects both his pre-dinner beer and a complete account of the day's findings. I gave him the account. He sat behind his desk, with his fingers laced across his middle regions and his eyes half closed, which is what he looks like when he's processing information at a speed the rest of us can't achieve, and sees no reason to pretend otherwise. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The portfolio," he said. "Taken by the killer," I said. "Has to be. It contained documents Elliot had assembled about the foundation discrepancies, including something linking Cray to the foundation. The killer needed those documents." "Not necessarily the killer," Wolfe said. "Someone who came afterward, before the body was found. Between midnight and 7 a.m. Not much of a window for a secondary visitor." I paused. "Though the service entrance keycard log was checked by the police." "Yes." He opened his eyes fully. "Archie, how many people knew that Elliot Marsh was compiling a dossier on the foundation irregularities?" I thought about it. Petra, who he told directly. Daniel Ferris, who he mentioned it to. Presumably Marcus, whom he'd contacted about a meeting. And possibly Cray, if the letter in the portfolio was from or about him. "Who told us about it? Who hired us to investigate it?" I agreed, leaving us with the charming possibility that our client is more complicated than she presented. She is invariably more complicated than she presented. All clients are. He reached for the beer. The question of the letter is central. Elliot had found documentation, perhaps correspondence, perhaps financial records, connecting Roland Cray to the Foundation's irregularities. This suggests the embezzlement was not merely Marcus Voss operating alone. It suggests a more complex arrangement. He paused. I will want to see all of them. Arrange it. All of them here? In the office? Yes. That's 5 people, Wolfe. Cornelia, Marcus, Petra, Ferris, and Cray. Getting Cray to come here is going to require leverage I'm not sure we have yet. We have sufficient leverage, Wolfe said serenely. Tell Mr. Cray that we have information connecting him to the Voss Foundation accounts, and that he may prefer to discuss it in private before we discuss it with Lieutenant Rowcliffe. He will come. He was probably right. People with something to hide generally choose the conversation they can control over the one they can't. And tell Rowcliffe, Wolfe added, nothing, not yet. Withholding from Rowcliffe is one of my great pleasures, I assured him. I know, said Wolfe, it is one of the few pleasures you take that requires no justification. Fritz called us to dinner at 7:15, and Wolfe spent the meal discussing with perfect contentment the proper method for preparing sole meunière, while I sat across from him, thinking about a dead man, a missing portfolio, and a name underlined in red on a letter with Foundation letterhead. The sole was exceptional. The mystery was not yet. Wolfe held his audience on Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, which he chose deliberately. Late enough in the day that people feel the week's accumulated pressure. Early enough that the desire for a drink hasn't made them loose in the wrong ways. The office was arranged as it always is for these occasions. Wolfe behind his desk, me at my desk to the side, and the red leather chair and 4 additional chairs of various provenance, arranged in a rough semicircle facing him. Getting them all there had taken most of Friday and Saturday morning, and the strategic deployment of exactly the kind of implications Wolfe had suggested. Cornelia came because she was the client. Petra came because she was grieving and wanted movement. Daniel Ferris came because he was frightened and preferred action to waiting. Marcus came because the alternative was to appear to be hiding, which he was too smart to allow. And Roland Cray came, after 2 calls and 1 firmly worded message from me, because Wolfe had dangled exactly the right bait, and Cray recognized a situation he needed to manage. They arrived within 15 minutes of each other. The atmosphere in the office, by the time the last of them was seated, had the specific quality of a room in which several people are pretending not to know things they know. Cray and Marcus did not look at each other directly. I noticed that. Cornelia watched them both. Petra sat beside Ferris, which surprised me slightly. Some established familiarity there. Ferris sat with his hands on his knees, with the controlled posture of a man managing his own adrenaline. Wolfe surveyed them all for a moment, with the calm satisfaction of a man who has assembled a complicated piece of machinery and is about to determine whether it runs. I am grateful for your presence, he said, which was a polite fiction we all accepted. I intend to share what I have learned and to ask several questions. I would encourage candor. Candor at this point costs less than its alternative. Cray said from the far right chair, with the pleasant neutrality of a man at a board meeting, We're not in a legal proceeding, Mr. Wolfe. You have no authority here. Correct, Wolfe said. I have only intelligence. It is generally sufficient. He settled back. Elliot Marsh was killed by a blow to the head sometime between 11:15 and 12:30 last Monday night. The apartment was not forced. He was not robbed of anything visible. However, a leather portfolio containing documents he had compiled was removed from the apartment, either by the killer or by someone who arrived after. Those documents concerned financial irregularities at the Voss Foundation. Cornelia's face showed nothing. Marcus picked up his glass of water. The irregularities, Wolfe continued, involved the systematic misdirection of approximately $400,000 in grant disbursements over 2 fiscal years, through a series of small adjustments designed to evade routine audit scrutiny. Elliot had assembled documentation, including what appears to have been correspondence or financial records linking these irregularities, not only to the Foundation's internal management, but to an outside party. He paused. Mr. Cray. Cray said, "That's a serious allegation." "It is an observation based on evidence," Wolfe said. "Your name appeared in documents Elliot was compiling. A letter on Voss Foundation letterhead, observed by a credible witness, had your name underlined. I would like you to tell me the nature of your relationship with the Voss Foundation." The room was very quiet. I watched Marcus Voss, who was looking at a point on the floor approximately 18 inches in front of Cray's shoes. Cray said, "I have made charitable contributions to the Voss Foundation." "Of what magnitude?" A pause. "Smaller than my investment in Marsh Ferris, but not insignificant." "And in exchange for those contributions?" Cray looked at Wolfe steadily. "Charitable contributions don't come with exchanges, Mr. Wolfe." "Some do," Wolfe said pleasantly. "Some function as payments with a philanthropic veneer. Payments for services, or for preferential treatment, or for the facilitation of financial arrangements that benefit both parties." He turned very slightly. "Mr. Voss." Marcus looked up. His expression was composed, which I noted cost him something. "You manage the disbursement records for the Voss Foundation," Wolfe said. "You have done so for 3 years. The irregularities your cousin identified began 2 years ago. In the period those irregularities occurred, did you receive payments from Roland Cray, directly or through any intermediary entity, in excess of what your foundation compensation provided?" The silence lasted 4 full seconds. I counted. "I want to speak to a lawyer before." "You may certainly do so," Wolfe said. "At any point. Doing so now, in this room, in this company, will be understood as a confirmation of what I've suggested. Doing so after a candid response to a straightforward question will be understood as prudence." He paused. "The question was simple, Mr. Voss." Marcus said, very quietly, "The arrangement was not what you're implying." "Then tell me what it was." Another silence. Cornelia Voss had gone very still. The stillness of someone whose worst suspicion is being confirmed in real time, and who has decided to feel it later, in private. "Cray needed foundation grants directed to certain non-profit entities," Marcus said, in the tone of a man reading from a document he wishes were shorter. "Entities that were in practice associated with his own investment network. The grants were legitimate. The entities are real and do real work, but they served Cray's purposes. In exchange, he made payments to an account I controlled. Payments totaling, over 2 years, approximately $380,000. And Elliot found the documentation. He found the discrepancies. He was going to take them to the board." Marcus looked at his stepmother, just for a moment. "I sent him a message 10 days ago, saying I needed to explain the context. He told me there was no context that would make it acceptable, and that he was giving me 1 week." He stopped. "I didn't go to his apartment. I didn't kill him." "Where were you?" I said from my desk, "Monday night between 11 and 1. He looked at me. "At home, alone. I had a bottle of wine, and I sat in my apartment and tried to decide what to do." He paused. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like the truth," Petra said unexpectedly, from across the semicircle. "Because Marcus, whatever else he is, doesn't go to people's apartments at midnight and hit them with mantelpieces. That's not who he is." "Thank you," Marcus said, with dry bitterness, "for that specific defense." "Who then?" Ferris said. He'd been silent until now, watching with the wariness of someone who has been accused of something and is waiting to see the accusation redirect. If Marcus didn't, who had a reason? Wolfe looked at Ferris. "Mr. Ferris, on the night of the murder, you said you were home alone." "I was. Your wife was in Boston." "Yes. When did she leave?" A pause. Sunday afternoon. And she returned? Wednesday, when she heard about when I called her. You called her Wednesday. Wolfe's eyes moved slightly. Not Monday night, not Tuesday morning. Ferris frowned. I didn't want to alarm her before I knew more. And the police. I was dealing with the police Tuesday. Of course. Wolfe was quiet for a moment. Mr. Cray, on Monday night. I was at an event, Cray said promptly. A dinner at the Metropolitan Club. I can provide 20 witnesses. Roland Cray would not commit violence without an alibi, any more than he would commit anything else without a plan. If Cray was involved in Elliot's death, it was not through his own hands. One final question for this session, Wolfe said. He paused, and the pause had weight. Elliot Marsh told his cousin Petra approximately 2 months ago that he had insurance against Roland Cray, something separate from the business relationship and the foundation irregularities. He looked at Cray. What was that insurance? The Metropolitan Club alibi didn't waver, but something in Cray's face moved, very briefly, like something passing beneath still water. I don't know what you mean, he said. You have said that before, Wolfe said. It was not more convincing the second time. He looked around the room. That is sufficient for today. I ask all of you to remain available. There will be more questions. They filed out with varying degrees of composure. Marcus left without looking at his stepmother. Cray left with his phone already at his ear. Petra touched Ferris briefly on the arm in the hallway, in a gesture that was sympathetic rather than romantic, but that still told me something about how well they knew each other. Cornelia was the last to go. At the door she turned and looked at Wolfe. Marcus, she said, the embezzlement. A matter for the Foundation's board, and ultimately the authorities, Wolfe said. It is not, I think, the whole of this crime. No, she said, I didn't think it was either. She paused. Find the rest of it. When she was gone, I turned to Wolfe. He was already reaching for the house phone to call Fritz and inquire about the evening's menu. Cray knows what the insurance was, I said. Obviously. And you think it's connected to who killed Elliot? I think it is the key that opens everything, Wolfe said. We need to find what Elliot had on Cray, and we need to find it before whoever took that portfolio acts on whatever information they're now holding. The portfolio was taken by the killer, I said. If we find what the insurance was, we find the killer. Or, Wolfe said, we find something considerably more complicated. He picked up the phone. Fritz, tell me about dinner. I spent Sunday in places that Wolfe doesn't go, which is everywhere. The first stop was a conversation with a contact of mine at the county clerk's office, a woman named Dolores, who has a memory for property records and a fondness for the good coffee I bring when I need something. Over that coffee, I asked her to look up every entity associated with Roland Cray that had received a grant from the Voss Foundation in the past 3 years. She was back to me within 2 hours with a list of 4 organizations. 3 of them were straightforward, small nonprofits doing genuine work in housing and education, exactly as Marcus had described. The 4th was interesting. It was called the Meridian Cultural Initiative, a 501c3 registered in Delaware 18 months ago, operating address in Manhattan. It had received 2 Voss Foundation grants, totaling $140,000. Its stated mission was supporting emerging artists through residencies and exhibition opportunities. It had a website, a board of 3, and a physical address in a building on West 23rd Street. I went to the building on West 23rd Street. It was a commercial building, mixed use, some office tenants, some storage, 1 photography studio. The Meridian Cultural Initiative was listed on the directory as Suite 4B. Suite 4B turned out to be a small office that contained a desk, a phone, 2 filing cabinets, and a young woman named Ashley, who told me she was the administrative assistant and that the director, a Dr. Holt, was not available. I noted that Dr. Holt's office, visible through a glass partition, contained a single framed piece of art, 3 stacked boxes, and no signs of recent use. I asked Ashley how many artists the initiative had supported in the past year. 7 artists have been supported through our residency program, she said. Can you name one? A pause. Our artist relationships are confidential. I thanked her and left. Outside, I called a friend at a financial journalism outlet who has a talent for following money through its least scenic routes. I described the Meridian Cultural Initiative and asked him to run it against Cray's known financial network. He said he'd have something by evening. He had something by 4 p.m. The Meridian Cultural Initiative shared a registered agent in Delaware with 2 other entities that were cleanly connected to a holding company Roland Cray controlled through a second layer of incorporation. The grants from the Voss Foundation, directed to Meridian by Marcus Voss, were, in practical effect, cycling through a non-profit shell and emerging on the other side as operating funds for a Cray-adjacent investment vehicle. It was elegant, and if the Foundation's independent auditors hadn't noticed it in 2 years, clearly designed with expertise. But that was the embezzlement. That was Marcus's crime, and Cray's facilitation of it. What was the insurance? I went to Elliot's building next, the Cavendish. The police tape was gone from the apartment, but the building manager, a nervous man named Gregorian, was still in a state of agitated cooperativeness. I asked him whether Elliot had ever mentioned storing anything in the building's secure storage facility. The Cavendish was old enough to have a basement with individual lot storage units for tenants. Gregorian checked. Elliot had a storage unit. The police had not, apparently, searched it. They'd focused on the apartment itself. I asked Gregorian if the storage unit was still sealed. He checked again. It's locked. Only Mr. Marsh had a key. Mr. Marsh's estate is represented by his aunt, Cornelia Voss, I said, which was an improvisation, but not an entirely unfair one. She has authorized access for the purposes of this investigation. I showed him the business card Cornelia had given me, which had her name, the Foundation address, and nothing that said anything about authorizing storage unit access. Gregorian looked at it with the focus of a man who wants to be relieved of responsibility rather than burdened with it, and led me to the basement. The storage unit was a 4x6 cage with a padlock. Gregorian's master key didn't work on it, which meant Elliot had changed the lock. I made a note to get a locksmith and came back with one 2 hours later. Inside the storage unit were 3 boxes and a fireproof document safe. I had the locksmith open the safe. Inside the safe were 2 items, a USB drive and an envelope sealed with tape marked, "In the event of my death, for Cornelia Voss." I took both items and had the locksmith reseal the storage unit as best he could. Then I went back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the plant rooms when I arrived at 6, which meant I had to wait until 6:30 when he came down. I used the time to look at what was on the USB drive on my laptop. There were 11 files. 10 of them were the Foundation documents, the same discrepancy analysis Elliot had described to Petra, meticulously organized, with annotations in Elliot's clean technical hand showing how each redirection worked. Clear enough to present to a board. Clear enough to present to a prosecutor. The 11th file was different. It was a single scanned document. A letter typed on plain paper without letterhead, dated 14 months ago. It was addressed to Elliot Marsh personally. It was from Roland Cray. The letter was, in its precise and careful language, a threat. It told Elliot that Cray was aware that Marsh Ferris had, during the Harwick deal, committed certain representations to a financing entity that were materially misleading. In plain language, that Elliot had misrepresented the project's status to secure bridge financing. The misrepresentation hadn't caused harm, in the end, because the deal had collapsed before the financing was deployed. But the act itself was potentially criminal, and Cray had documentation of it. The letter did not explicitly say, "Do what I want, or I'll report this." It didn't have to. What it said was, "I wanted you to know that I am aware of this matter, and I trust we will continue to find our business relationship mutually beneficial." Elliot had kept this letter. He had kept it in a fireproof safe, in a locked storage unit, with a sealed envelope for his aunt, in case he died. Elliot Marsh had known Roland Cray was blackmailing him, and he had prepared for the possibility that it might get worse. When Wolfe came down at 6:30, I put the USB drive and the envelope on his desk and told him what I'd found. He looked at the USB drive. He looked at the sealed envelope. He looked at me. "Open the envelope," he said. "Open it." I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page, dated 3 weeks before Elliot's death. It read, "Aunt Cornelia, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and it's connected to one of two things: the foundation irregularities I've found, or the letter from Cray, which I've kept on the drive in this safe. I don't think Cray will actually hurt me. He's too careful. But I'm less certain about what he might ask someone else to do. The person I'm least certain about is not Marcus. Marcus is greedy, but not violent. It's the one who's been in both camps without anyone knowing it. Look at who connects Cray to the foundation from the inside. It isn't Marcus working alone. There's someone else. Find the thread. No date beyond the initial." Wolfe read it twice, which is unusual. He generally reads things once and retains them perfectly. Then he set it down and was very still for a moment. "The thread," he said. "Who connects Cray to the foundation from the inside?" I said. "Marcus manages disbursements, but someone had to facilitate the initial relationship. Someone had to introduce Cray to the foundation structure, help him understand which grants to target, help him set up the Meridian shell in a way that would pass basic scrutiny. Someone with both institutional knowledge of the foundation and a relationship with Roland Cray," Wolfe said. "That narrows it," I said, "but not as much as I'd like." "No," Wolfe agreed, "but combined with one other fact. The fact that the killer had access to Elliot's apartment without forcing entry, at midnight, without leaving traces, it narrows it considerably." He looked at me. "Archie, who had a key to Elliot Marsh's apartment?" I thought about it. "Rosa Padilla, the housekeeper, building management, and whoever Elliot had given a key to personally. Yes, and who among our cast of characters had the kind of relationship with Elliot that might occasion the gift of a key?" I looked at him. He looked back at me. "Petra," I said slowly. "She said she and Elliot had dinner every week. They were close. Closer than cousins," she said. "Yes, and Petra is completing a graduate degree. She has, therefore, limited financial resources, and she has, throughout this investigation, been the most forthcoming of all our subjects, which is either honest transparency or a very sophisticated management of narrative." "She pointed us at Marcus," I said. "Yes, she did." Wolfe folded his hands. "And she mentioned the insurance independently, telling us Elliot had said it, which either means she's helping us find the truth or she's directing our attention. She couldn't have. She wouldn't have." I stopped. Because the fact was, I liked Petra Voss. I found her credible and her grief genuine. But Wolfe has said to me, on more than one occasion, that the most dangerous kind of dishonesty comes wrapped in genuine emotion. You can fake tears. You cannot easily fake the kind of detail Petra had provided. And yet, "We don't have enough," I said. "Not yet," Wolfe said. "But we are close. Make the calls. I need to test something." Wolfe spent Monday morning in the plant rooms with his orchids and whatever interior processes he conducts up there that produce, by 11 o'clock, a fully constructed theory. I spent Monday morning on the phone. The first call was to a woman I know at the SEC's Enforcement Liaison Office, who has occasionally pointed me toward public documents that save me time. I asked her about Roland Cray's regulatory history. She said she could speak only to public record. The public record showed one settled enforcement matter from 8 years ago, a question of disclosure timing in a private equity transaction, resolved without admission of wrongdoing, and with a financial penalty that was significant enough to be meaningful, and small enough not to have made major news. The second call was to the personnel office of the Voss Foundation. I identified myself as doing administrative work for Cornelia Voss, which was not entirely inaccurate. I asked for a list of foundation trustees and their committee assignments over the past 3 years. After some deliberation, a very accommodating administrator emailed me the public version of the Foundation's governance structure. I looked at the committee assignments. Marcus Voss was on the disbursement committee. This I knew. What I hadn't known was who else sat on that committee. There were 3 members. Marcus, a retired judge named Feldstein, who I had no reason to suspect of anything, and a 3rd member who had joined the committee 18 months ago, exactly when the irregularities began. The 3rd member was Cornelia Voss. I sat with that for a moment. Then I pulled the list of people who had introduced Roland Cray to the Voss Foundation as a donor. The Foundation's public donor acknowledgments, published in their annual report, thanked new donors with a note about who had brought them into the Foundation's circle. Cray had been brought in 2 years ago. The acknowledgment read, "We welcome Roland Cray, introduced by longtime friend of the Foundation, Mrs. Cornelia Voss." I put the phone down and looked at the ceiling for 30 seconds. Then I called Wolfe on the house intercom. He answered with the brevity he reserves for interruptions during orchid time. "It's Cornelia," I said. A pause. "Come up," he said. I went up to the plant rooms, which I do rarely enough that the heat and the smell, wet earth, and 1,000 varieties of controlled perfume always take me a moment to adjust to. Wolfe was standing near the catalea, holding a pot with the particular tenderness he reserves for things he genuinely loves. I told him what I found. He listened without looking at me. When I finished, he set the pot down with great care. "She brought Cray to the Foundation," I said. "She sat on the disbursement committee. She knew exactly how the grants worked. She could have facilitated Marcus, or directed him. Or," Wolfe said, "she could have been unaware that Cray used her introduction for purposes she did not intend, and that Marcus, with or without her knowledge, built the scheme using his own access. Or she built the scheme using Marcus as the hands, which would explain why she was so certain it was Marcus who killed Elliot. Because she knew Marcus had a reason, because she helped create the reason. And why she came to us? Because if Marcus was arrested for the murder, the investigation into the Foundation irregularities might stop there. Pinned to Marcus, her own involvement buried. I thought about it. Except she told us about the irregularities herself. Why would she do that if she was involved? Because Elliot had told her he'd found them, Wolfe said. She knew the investigation would surface them regardless. Better to control the narrative from the beginning, present herself as a righteous aunt, horrified by her nephew's corruption, than to have it emerge sideways. And she was genuinely horrified, I said, because Elliot was going to find everything, not just Marcus, her too. Wolfe was quiet for a long moment. "There is still the question of the murder," he said. "Cornelia Voss directing us toward Marcus as the killer is explicable as self-protection regardless of whether she committed the murder. The person who actually killed Elliot Marsh, who had access to the apartment, who removed the portfolio? Petra," I said, "or Cornelia herself. Cornelia at midnight in an Upper West Side apartment, swinging Elliot against a fireplace." I shook my head. "She's 50-something, but she's not exactly. She is, according to her Foundation bio, an avid competitive equestrian. She has competed at the regional level for 20 years. Wolfe looked at me calmly. "She is, by any reasonable assessment, quite strong." I had not known that. I filed it. "There's one more thing," Wolfe said. He turned back to the cattleyas. "The letter in Elliot's safe said the person connecting Cray to the Foundation from the inside was not Marcus alone, and that whoever it was, they had been in both camps, both the Foundation and, presumably, Cray's world. Cornelia introduced Cray. She knew him socially, presumably. Yes, but also, Petra." I looked at him. "Petra is completing a graduate degree at Columbia in art history," he said. "The Meridian Cultural Initiative, Cray's shell entity, describes its mission as supporting emerging artists through residencies and exhibition opportunities." He turned to face me. "An art world organization requiring credibility, requiring some working knowledge of how artist support and residency programs actually function, requiring a degree of authenticity to survive even cursory scrutiny. Petra helped set it up, I said. That is my hypothesis, Wolfe said. Find out if Petra Voss has any documented connection to the Meridian Cultural Initiative. I went back downstairs and spent 2 hours on the phone and the internet, being increasingly convinced that Wolfe was right. The Meridian Cultural Initiative's first public event, a small exhibition at a Lower East Side gallery, 7 months ago, had been reviewed in a local arts blog. The review mentioned the initiative's curatorial consultant, who had organized the exhibition, unnamed in the review itself, but referenced by their initials, P.V. Petra Voss, art history graduate student, curatorial consultant for Roland Cray's nonprofit shell that laundered money from her own family's foundation. I sat back and tried to arrange it into a coherent shape. Petra and Cray, some relationship, how, when, established through what, that I didn't yet have. Petra helping Cray legitimize the Meridian shell, providing the arts world credibility it needed. Marcus managing the disbursements, directing foundation money toward Meridian. Cray using the arrangement to both move money and maintain leverage over Marcus. And Cornelia, where exactly in all of this? And then Elliot, discovering the discrepancies. Telling Petra, because he trusted her, not knowing that Petra was inside the scheme. Petra learning that Elliot had assembled documentation, that he was about to go to the board, that the documentation included a letter connecting Cray to the foundation, a letter that would unravel everything, including her own involvement. And Petra had a key to Elliot's apartment. I had it, I thought, almost all of it, but almost isn't enough for Wolfe. He needs the architecture to be complete, load-bearing at every joint. I went to tell him what I'd found. Wolfe set the final piece of the architecture on Tuesday afternoon, through a method I have come to think of as his version of a controlled experiment. He introduces a specific element to a specific subject and watches what happens with the detached curiosity of a man who already knows the answer and is simply collecting confirmation. He made 2 calls himself, which is unusual. Wolfe dislikes the telephone in a way that transcends preference and approaches principle. But these calls he made personally, from his desk, while I sat at mine and listened. The first call was to Roland Cray. Mr. Cray, Wolfe said, I have found the document you were concerned about, the letter you sent to Elliot Marsh 14 months ago. I also have extensive financial documentation connecting you to the Voss Foundation irregularities through the Meridian Cultural Initiative. He paused. I intend to share these with the relevant authorities, unless you answer one question candidly, here and now. I could hear Cray's voice through the receiver, though not the words. The question, Wolfe continued, is this. How did you first meet Petra Voss, and what is the nature of your arrangement with her? Another pause. Longer. Then Cray spoke at length. I could catch fragments. Introduction. Foundation event. She approached me. The initiative was her idea. When he finished, Wolfe said, Thank you. You will hear from me. He hung up. He sat for a moment. Petra approached Cray, he said to me. At a foundation fundraiser 18 months ago, she told him she had an idea for a mutually beneficial arrangement. She would help him design a vehicle that could receive foundation grants. He would provide the capital to make it credible, and she would receive a consulting fee through the initiative that she needed for financial reasons she did not specify. He paused. Cray described her as impressively strategic for her age. He's praising the person who helped him defraud a foundation, I said. He is also now quite willing to discuss that person in order to protect himself. Wolfe made a small gesture. He will be less willing to discuss the blackmail letter. But we have the letter. Did he know Petra killed Elliot? He says not. He says he was genuinely at the Metropolitan Club that night. I believe him, not because he is a man of conscience, but because he had more to lose from Elliot's death becoming a murder investigation than from Elliot's threat to go to the foundation board. He could have managed the foundation matter through lawyers and leverage. Wolfe's fingers laced together. Someone else decided on a more permanent solution. The second call was to Petra. He told her he had found something in Elliot's storage unit that she would want to know about before he shared it with the police. He invited her to come to the brownstone that evening. He told her to come alone. She came at 8:30. She looked different from the coffee shop version. Still the jeans, still the braid, but the red around her eyes was gone, replaced by something more contained and careful. She sat in the red leather chair and looked at Wolfe with the specific alertness of someone who has decided, on the walk over, to be very controlled. "You found something," she said. "I found several things," Wolfe said, "including a letter from Elliot, sealed in a fireproof safe, addressed to his aunt, in which he described his suspicion that someone connected to both Roland Cray and the Foundation was more deeply involved than Marcus Voss. He let that sit. He did not name you. He may not have reached that conclusion, but the letter, combined with other documentation, points unmistakably." Petra said nothing. Her hands were in her lap, and they were very still. "I also found," Wolfe continued, "documentation confirming that you consulted for the Meridian Cultural Initiative, the shell entity through which Foundation funds were misdirected to Cray's financial network. You conceived of and helped establish that entity. You can't prove any of this," she said. "I can prove the Meridian connection, the arts review, the documentation of your work." He paused. "The rest, your entry to Elliot's apartment, the removal of the portfolio, I cannot prove to a legal standard. Not yet." "Then why am I here?" "Because," Wolfe said, "Elliot trusted you. He told you about the Foundation discrepancies because he trusted you completely. He did not know you were the architect of those discrepancies. And I am giving you the opportunity to tell me what happened in that apartment before I tell the police what I know, and let them draw their own conclusions, which, in the absence of your account, will be the harshest possible ones." The room was very quiet. I didn't move. Fritz, somewhere in the house, made no sound. The brownstone held its breath. Petra looked at the desk in front of Wolfe. She looked at the sealed envelope, which Wolfe had placed there deliberately, like a prop on a stage. "He called me," she said finally. Her voice was very flat. "Monday night at 10:30. He said he'd been going through everything, and he'd found the Meridian connection. He said he knew it was me." She paused. "He said he wanted me to come over so we could talk about it. He said he wasn't going to go to the police, that he wanted to understand how it happened, that he—" She stopped. "He still trusted me, even knowing. He wanted to protect me if he could." "And you went?" "I went." She looked up at the ceiling. He wasn't angry. That was the terrible part. He was hurt, sad. He kept saying he didn't understand why I needed money badly enough to do this. He didn't know about. She stopped. "About?" Wolfe said. She closed her eyes. "There are debts. Not school debts. My mother, Cornelia, she controls the Voss Trust. My inheritance is entirely at her discretion until I'm 35. She controls what I receive, when, how. And she's not generous. I've been on an allowance that doesn't cover my actual expenses for 3 years. I asked her to increase it. She refused." She paused. "So when Roland Cray offered to pay me to help him design something that would work, I needed the money. I told myself the Foundation would never notice. I told myself the grants were going to real organizations. And when Elliot was about to expose it?" The silence was very long. "I didn't plan it," she said. "I was standing there, and he was saying all these gentle things, and I was thinking about everything that would happen. The police, the family, Columbia, the public. And I was looking at the fireplace and She stopped. She pressed her hands together. It was one moment, one terrible moment, and then he was on the floor, and I knew what I'd done. She didn't cry. I think she was past tears. "The portfolio," Wolfe said. "I took it. I knew he'd assembled the documents. I needed to remove them." She looked at Wolfe with something like exhaustion. "I didn't know about the storage unit. I didn't know about the safe." "No," Wolfe said. Elliot was more thorough than you expected. He was always more thorough than you expected, she said. And there was, in her voice, something that might have been grief. Wolfe looked at her for a long moment. I am going to call Lieutenant Rowcliffe, he said. You will remain here until he arrives. I would recommend using the time to arrange legal representation. She nodded. Is there anything else you want to tell me? He asked. She thought about it. Cornelia didn't know about my involvement. She introduced Cray to the foundation as a genuine donor. She didn't know what he intended to use it for. She had no idea. She paused. She's going to be destroyed by this. She will be hurt, Wolfe agreed. Whether she is destroyed is a matter of character, and I cannot assess that. I called Rowcliffe. He arrived in 40 minutes, and I will spare you the drama of his expression when he walked into the office and found Petra Voss sitting in the red leather chair, and Wolfe behind his desk, and the whole case arranged and solved in a room he'd never bothered to search. It was, if I'm being honest, one of the better moments of my professional life. The gathering the following Saturday was different from the first one. It was smaller, for one thing. Roland Cray had retained counsel and sent his regrets, which was fine, because his role was clear and his attendance unnecessary. Rowcliffe had also declined, though he had been briefed in full. What remained were Cornelia Voss, Marcus Voss, Daniel Ferris, and an addition who hadn't been present before, Gerald Marsh, Elliot's estranged father, who had driven in from Connecticut when he heard that the investigation was reaching its conclusion. He was a lean, silent man in his late 60s, who sat slightly apart from the others and said nothing, but whose presence seemed important in some way that was more about witness than participation. Petra was in the custody of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, represented by a lawyer Cornelia had paid for, which was the first thing Cornelia had done when she learned the truth. Retained counsel for the woman who had killed her nephew. Which is the kind of complicated human act that doesn't reduce to anything simple. Wolfe sat behind his desk. He looked, as he sometimes does at the conclusion of things, like a man who has done work he finds satisfying, and is now engaged in the formal presentation of it, the way a craftsman presents a finished piece. He had a beer. He had declined Fritz's offer of the duck for dinner until after this business was finished, which was the greatest sign of his investment in the proceedings. I will be concise, he said, which with Wolfe means he will be thorough in a way that merely feels concise compared to his capacity for elaboration. He began with the architecture. 18 months ago, Petra Voss, facing financial pressure from a restricted trust and an inflexible stepmother, had encountered Roland Cray at a foundation event and proposed an arrangement. She had the knowledge of the foundation's grant structure, absorbed through years of attending foundation events, board meetings she'd occasionally been brought to by Cornelia, and general family familiarity. Cray had the need. He wanted to cycle money through a respectable nonprofit to clean certain investment-related transactions. The Meridian Cultural Initiative was designed by Petra, given credibility by her arts credentials and her connections to the graduate art world, and funded initially by Cray. Marcus had been approached next, by Petra, not by Cray directly. Petra understood that Marcus was resentful of his financial situation. The will had given Cornelia substantial control that Marcus felt was unjust, and that he managed the disbursement process. She had framed the arrangement to him as a private correction of a family injustice. Foundation money going to a connected entity wasn't really wrong, she'd argued. It was just efficient. Marcus, who wanted the money and wanted to believe the rationalization, had cooperated. Cornelia's introduction of Cray as a donor had been entirely innocent. She had met him at a charity event, found him plausible, and brought him to the foundation as a genuine philanthropist. She had no knowledge of what her introduction enabled. For a year and a half, the arrangement had worked. Small, careful, below the threshold of audit scrutiny. Then, Elliot Marsh, in the course of his own financial research, partly driven by the Marsh-Ferris troubles, partly by the natural analysis of a man who understood money, had pulled the Foundation's public reports and noticed, across 2 years, patterns that didn't align with normal grant distribution. He had obtained internal documents. How exactly was something Wolfe said he suspected but couldn't prove, though his guess was that a Foundation employee had been a source, perhaps innocently. Elliot had begun to construct his dossier. He had told Petra because he trusted her, and because she was close to the Foundation family. He had not told her because he suspected her. He had told her to warn her, to bring her inside his confidence, to have an ally. Petra had understood immediately that the investigation would reach her. She had perhaps hoped she could manage it, redirect Elliot toward Marcus and Cray, minimize her own involvement, help shape the outcome. She had given us the information about the insurance, precisely and voluntarily, because she wanted to establish her credentials as a truth-teller, and because she knew the Cray letter was damaging to Cray and to Marcus, but, she had calculated, did not directly implicate her. She had not calculated on the Meridian Cultural Review. She had not calculated on Wolfe's particular interest in the thread that connected the Foundation's inside to Cray's outside. The night of the murder, Wolfe said, Elliot had connected the thread himself. He had found her name in the Meridian documentation. How precisely, we don't yet know, though the digital trail exists and will be recovered. He called her. He invited her to come speak with him, because he was, fundamentally, a decent man who wanted to give someone he loved a chance to explain. He paused. She went. The conversation began honestly and ended in violence. Whether it was premeditated, whether Petra went to the apartment intending to kill Elliot, or whether it was, as she described it, a single terrible moment, is for the courts and the jury to determine. The physical act is not in question. She struck Elliot from behind as he moved toward the fireplace. They were standing before it, in conversation, with sufficient force to cause a fatal injury. She then took the leather portfolio, locked the apartment door from inside, using her key, and left through the building's service entrance. The keycard log showed nothing, Ferris said. The keycard log showed no card usage, Wolfe said. A different matter. Petra had at some prior point made note of the service entrance access procedure. Elliot had mentioned the building's layout to her in casual conversation, and she had the particular attentiveness of someone who files away information. The service entrance used a standard magnetic card, but it also had a manual override code for building staff, posted inside the manager's office, visible to anyone who had occasion to visit that office. Petra had accompanied Elliot to the building manager's office 6 months ago to help him negotiate a lease renewal. Elliot had brought her because she was articulate and he trusted her. She had seen the override code. She remembered it. She used it. He paused. The keycard log showed nothing, because she did not use a card. The room was silent. Cornelia Voss sat very straight, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of someone constructing a new understanding of her life. Marcus, Wolfe said, not unkindly, you did not kill your cousin, but you participated in a fraud that contributed to the circumstances of his death, and you will need to account for it. He paused. Cooperation with the authorities regarding the full extent of the arrangement, including Cray's role, will affect how that accounting goes. Marcus nodded once. He was looking at his hands. Mr. Cray, Wolfe continued, though Cray was absent, faces significant exposure. The enforcement matter will be substantial. He has retained counsel, who is already, I understand, attempting to negotiate a cooperation agreement. The financial penalty will be meaningful. Whether it is sufficient is a question for regulators and prosecutors. And the Foundation, Cornelia said. Her voice was entirely controlled. The 400,000. Most of it is recoverable, I believe, if proper legal action is pursued against the Meridian entity and against Cray's holding structure. The Foundation's reputation can survive this with the right handling. The board should be informed promptly and completely. Delay will cause more damage than the revelation. She nodded. Gerald Marsh, from his separate chair, said his first and only words of the meeting. "What do I do?" Wolfe looked at him. "You grieve your son, Mr. Marsh. That, I'm afraid, I cannot assist with." The old man nodded, and looked down. After they had gone, Fritz brought the beer, the second of the evening, and I sat in my chair, and did the accounting in my head, the way I always do at the end of these things. Elliot Marsh was dead. He had been killed by the person he trusted most, for the sin of discovering the truth, and being decent enough to confront it privately, before making it public. His decency had cost him everything. These are the cases that stay with you. Petra Voss would face a murder charge. Her lawyer, Cornelia's lawyer now, was good, and the argument about premeditation versus passion would be argued for months in a courtroom. The outcome was uncertain. The act was not. Marcus Voss would cooperate and diminish, and carry the knowledge of his complicity for the rest of his life, which is a kind of sentence regardless of what the courts decided. Roland Cray would pay money and issue carefully worded statements, and probably within a few years be operating again under a restructured entity with a different name. That is the particular resilience of men like Cray. Cornelia Voss would rebuild the foundation, or try to. She would sit with the knowledge that her stepdaughter had murdered her nephew, that her stepson had participated in a fraud, and that her own well-intentioned introduction of a predatory man had set the whole thing in motion. She would be fine, probably. People with her kind of architecture usually are. But fine is different from whole, and she would know the difference. Daniel Ferris would eventually clear his name, restructure his company as best he could without Elliot, and go on. I hoped he'd get a good night's sleep, which he probably hadn't in 2 weeks. I looked across the room at Wolfe, who was sitting with his beer and his satisfaction, and his particular evening contentment, already thinking, I suspected, about tomorrow's orchids. "You knew about Petra before the confrontation," I said, "at the office, when you gave her the chance to tell you herself." "I suspected strongly," he said. "The confirmation required her own admission, which required the right circumstances." He looked at me calmly. "I have found that people who have done terrible things, and who are not at their core terrible people, will often tell the truth, if given the opportunity to tell it on terms that feel, even marginally, like their own choice." "She told us to protect herself," I said. "She told us because she was exhausted by lying," he said. "Both things can be true." I thought about Petra in the coffee shop, the red eyes, the hands around the mug, the flatness in her voice when she described finding her cousin dead. All of it genuine in its way. Grief for what she'd done. Grief for the person she'd been before one moment in front of a fireplace changed everything. "She loved him," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "That made it worse, not better. It nearly always does." Fritz appeared in the doorway to announce that dinner would be ready in 20 minutes, and that the duck had benefited from the extra time. Wolfe brightened perceptibly. "The duck," he said to me, with the tone of a man surfacing from difficulty into something reliable, "has been braised with green olives and a reduction of the Chablis we opened Thursday. Fritz believes it is among his better efforts this season." "I'll try to meet it with appropriate appreciation," I said. "Do," said Wolfe. "We have spent a week in the company of fraud, betrayal, and murder. The least we can do is honor the duck." He rose from his chair, an operation of some architectural complexity, and moved toward the dining room. I followed, the way I always follow, 3 steps behind, closing the office lights as I went. Outside, New York made its ordinary evening sounds. Somewhere across town, Rowcliffe was closing a file, and taking credit for the resolution in the way Rowcliffe does. And I let him have it, because the credit was never the point. The point, when you worked for Nero Wolfe, was the answer. The precise, complete, irreducible answer, built from logic and patience, and the willingness to follow a thread wherever it led, even when it led somewhere nobody wanted to go. We sat down to dinner. The duck, as Fritz had promised, was exceptional. Some things in this business reliably are. The end.